Brent was still laughing when the hose erupted, drenching him in something that definitely wasn't water. Lyle slipped, trying to escape, landing face first in the mess as neighbors watched in stunned silence. One word echoed from across the street: karma. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The desert doesn't forgive stupidity. It punishes waste with dust and silence, and teaches you to value the things you used to take for granted: shade, cool air, and above all, water. So, when I heard the hiss that morning, sharp and serpentine, cutting through the usual dry hum of cicadas and wind-chafed stucco, I knew something was wrong. My sleep-addled mind tried to dismiss it. Maybe a leaky sprinkler head, maybe the neighbor's dog chasing a hose. But by the time I swung the door open and felt the dry heat slap me in the face, I already knew. Someone was bleeding my lifeline. The sun hadn't even cleared the rooftops, but already my front yard was lit like a stage, and front and center was a crime scene. The hose wasn't just stretched across my yard. It wound through it, kinked and muddied, the kind of kink you only get from dragging it in a hurry. The brass connector at my spigot gleamed, water still gurgling from the line. A tight stream snaked its way toward the street, carving a path through my decomposed granite, and that was the first cut. The insult came when I followed that line. There they were, Brent and Lyle, the neighborhood's self-appointed demigods, playing pretend behind their leased Ford Explorer. The thing was spotless already, black paint shining like obsidian, wheels glinting with chrome-polished arrogance. They wore matching neon yellow vests with HOA enforcement stamped across the back in cheap vinyl, like budget mall cops who'd somehow misplaced their Segways and dignity. Brent, with his buzz cut and Oakleys, waved like we were sharing beers at a cookout. Lyle, older, heavier, sporting a mustache that probably had its own HOA policy, just gave me a half-lazy shrug like I was the one making this awkward. "Just borrowing some water," Brent said. Casual, entitled, like I should be honored to hydrate their authority. That word, borrowing, burned hotter than the sidewalk under my feet. Borrowing implies consent. This was theft, and worse, it was theft wrapped in a smile and passed off as policy. My jaw clenched. I wanted to yell. I wanted to rip the hose from their hands and spray it right back at them. But I didn't. Because in that moment, I wasn't just furious. I was calculating. They didn't even care. And that meant they'd been doing it for longer than I realized. Long enough to be casual about it. Long enough to drive my last water bill up to triple digits and make me question my own usage habits. Long enough to think I wouldn't notice. Or worse, they thought I couldn't stop them. And that was their mistake. Brent and Lyle weren't anomalies. They were symptoms of something worse. A rot in the system that had been festering long before I noticed the hose. Around here, you could trim your hedges a half-inch too tall, and they'd snap a photo at dawn like wildlife photographers hunting invasive species. Leave your trash bin out past 6:01 p.m. on pickup day? Expect a yellow slip tucked under your doormat like a passive-aggressive love note, but paint your mailbox with anything other than the HOA-approved shade of federal sandstone beige? That was grounds for an official complaint, a fine, and, if Brent was feeling especially theatrical, a printed pamphlet titled, "Why Community Standards Matter." They weren't enforcing safety. They weren't preserving property values. They were playing power games, and the neighborhood had become their sandbox. I'd seen them once, clipboard in hand, measuring the angle of a neighbor's American flag, shaking their heads as if the stars and stripes themselves had committed treason. Another time, I watched them leave a violation notice for a 92-year-old widow whose lawn had grown a little brown in the July heat. No offer of help, just a threat of penalties and a smiling emoji sticker slapped on the envelope like that somehow made it friendlier. And behind them, like some smug puppeteer pulling the strings, was Nancy Keplinger. If Brent and Lyle were the teeth, Nancy was the jaw. She wore her title like armor, president of the Sweetwater Estates Homeowners Association, and drove her white BMW through the cul-de-sacs like a visiting dignitary. Her hair was always perfectly lacquered, her blazer ironed to razor edges, and her voice carried the same sugary condescension no matter the context. You could tell her your house had caught fire, and she'd respond with, "Oh dear, well, I hope your lawn was properly edged before the blaze." At the last board meeting, someone dared to ask whether it was really necessary for enforcement officers to issue warnings for bunting on Memorial Day. Nancy's reply? "We are not a neighborhood of chaos." Applause followed. From who? Mostly the same crowd that feared retaliation if they didn't clap. But this water theft that crossed a line. It wasn't about rules or appearances anymore. It was entitlement, pure and distilled. My resources, my property. And they took it with a smirk and the blessing of a woman who hadn't touched a garden hose in her life. My front yard was turning to dust while theirs sparkled with runoff, and my bill kept climbing. I wasn't just angry. I was done. Most people spend their retirement pruning roses or watching weather reports. Me? I catalog blueprints and drink black coffee from mugs that still smell like concrete dust. So when Brent and Lyle strolled onto my property like they were filming a reality show called HOA Special Forces, they didn't realize they were setting up camp on a battlefield I'd mapped 2 decades ago. Back in the late 90s, Sweetwater Estates was just dirt and promise. The developers wanted a full-service grid, clean water, gray water reclamation, smart backflow regulation. I was the lead engineer on the project, which meant every valve, every junction, every overflow channel passed under my pen before it ever touched pipe. And tucked into the very edge of the design, beneath a cluster of sycamores planted to soften the street line, was a rarely used but fully functional backflow override, hidden beneath a steel cover the size of a dinner plate. I hadn't thought about it in years. Until now. I pulled the blueprints from the old filing cabinet in my garage, still rolled, still smelling faintly of mildew and graphite. My fingers found the section like muscle memory. There it was, plot 16C, water feed line C7 branching off into the auxiliary loop, with a maintenance switch designed to flush and reverse in case of contamination. Never used, never removed, and now, just maybe, finally useful. The system was simple. If engaged, the backflow switch would redirect water pressure from the outbound line, normally flowing into homes, and reverse it for cleaning or testing. Usually, it flushed into a neutral containment unit. But if someone had a hose open and connected to that line, well, let's just say the experience would be unexpected. I made the call to Dennis. We'd worked together on the install. He owed me a few favors and had a dark sense of humor, 2 traits I was counting on. The second he picked up, I could already hear the grin forming behind his voice. "Sweetwater backflow system, huh? Haven't touched that relic in years," he said. "Well, there's a good reason to brush off the dust," I replied. "Let me guess. Illegal hookup?" I paused. "Not illegal," I said slowly. "Just wildly unauthorized." He chuckled. "Needed to reverse pressure for a bit?" "Just long enough," I said, eyes fixed on the hose outside, to teach 2 clowns a lesson they'll never forget. The neighborhood had never been quieter, the kind of silence that hangs just before something breaks, thick, expectant, almost sacred. I stood in the shadows of my kitchen, blinds tilted just enough to catch a glimpse of the spectacle outside. Brent and Lyle, oblivious to the ticking clock, were already mid-show. Their soap buckets clanked against the pavement. The hose, my hose, trailed like a lifeline toward their Explorer, which gleamed with more care than they'd shown to any person in this neighborhood. Brent whistled while he worked, spraying suds across the hood with smug precision. Lyle, ever the sidekick, was crouched by the wheels, scrubbing as if he were detailing a presidential limo. Their vests glared yellow in the sun, like highlighters marking their idiocy on the page of my street. At 9:12 a.m., the change was instantaneous. I felt it before I saw it, the vibration in the pipes beneath my feet, a low metallic cough from the spigot, like the system itself was clearing its throat. Then came the shift. The valve, flipped downtown by Dennis's expert hand, had reversed the flow with surgical precision. The line surged, not with water, but with everything the neighborhood wished it could flush and forget. And it came back with a vengeance. The hose bucked once, then spewed. A pressurized blast of foul, brown sludge erupted from the nozzle, hitting Brent square in the chest before he had time to register the betrayal. His laugh choked off mid-breath as the spray painted him in filth. He staggered back, slipped and crashed into the bird bath, sending up a splash of grimy feathers and feathers of soapy water. Lyle panicked, fumbling with the hose like it was a venomous snake. It twisted in his hands and caught him full in the face, knocking him backward into a puddle of his own making. There was a gasp. From across the street, a curtain fluttered. A phone rose. Then a delighted voice, clear and unfiltered. "Karma!" And just like that, the street awoke. Garage doors cracked open. Blinds lifted in synchronized choreography. Neighbors emerged in bathrobes and sandals, drawn by the noise and the primal magnetism of downfall. Some covered their mouths, others laughed. One woman whispered, "About time." And I, behind the glass, took a long sip of coffee, black, bitter, and finally satisfying. The community hall was packed tighter than I'd ever seen it. Folding chairs scraped across tile as neighbors shuffled in, some still in gardening gloves, others with arms crossed like they were preparing for battle. The air buzzed with that unmistakable blend of indignation and gossip-fueled adrenaline. Everyone had seen the footage. Next door lit up like a Christmas tree the moment Susan Parker uploaded the 30-second video of Brent catching the full wrath of a backflow system turned sour. The headline read, "HOA enforcers get a taste of their own medicine." Literally. Nancy Keplinger sat at the front, flanked by her usual lieutenants, clipboard sycophants and self-appointed rule czars. She wore her favorite blazer, the one with the faux gold buttons that always reminded me of a second-rate yacht captain. But this time, she looked smaller, her composure stretched thin like cling wrap over spoiled leftovers. The gavel in her hand tapped once, feebly, and the murmurs quieted, but only for a moment. "I think we all know why we're here," she began, her voice dry and cracking around the edges. "There has been an incident." "An incident?" Someone barked from the third row. "You mean a sewage baptism?" The room broke into restrained laughter. Nancy pursed her lips. Brent and Lyle sat 2 chairs over, looking like kids called to the principal's office, except one was still wearing the stained vest from that morning, as if clinging to some shred of authority. They tried to explain it away, claimed the hose must have been loose, that it was routine vehicle maintenance. But then someone played the clip again on a phone held high above the crowd. Lyle could clearly be heard saying, "This'll be quick. We'll top off and bounce before the old man even notices." That was my cue. I stood slowly, the thick stack of papers in my hands making a satisfying thud as I dropped them on the folding table in front of me. "Page 17, Section B," I said, projecting my voice like I was back in the briefing room of a city planning commission. "Unauthorized usage of private resources constitutes theft." Gasps. One woman nodded so hard I thought her glasses would fall off. I slid out the water bills, each one printed, highlighted, annotated. Then the photos. The video freeze frames. Finally, the pièce de résistance. My 20-year-old blueprint showing the very line they'd tapped into and the valve that turned their rinse into a reckoning. The room turned. Brent and Lyle wilted. Nancy stared at the documents like they were written in hieroglyphs. The board called a vote on the spot. Brent. Terminated. Lyle. Terminated. Nancy. Silent. A week later, she handed in her resignation. No applause, just the sound of order being restored. There's a strange serenity to watering your own lawn when you know nobody's siphoning it from the other end. The hose hums low in my grip, a steady, obedient serpent instead of a stolen vein. I stand there most mornings now, boots planted in damp earth, watching the blades of Bermuda grass rise back to life like they're grateful for the reprieve. No yellow patches, no silent thefts, just green, clean, and mine. Their truck is still parked on the far edge of Lot 22, behind the maintenance shed, forgotten, unused, and ironically, now streaked with dust. The same Explorer Brent and Lyle used to roll down the block with slow, suspicious passes, radio crackling with pretend importance. I see it now, untouched, a monument to failed authority. Last I checked, the new HOA president had reassigned it as storage for extra mulch. A fitting demotion. Brent was gone within days. The truck was one thing, but his pride didn't survive the headlines. HOA enforcers drenched in poetic justice made the rounds faster than a wildfire in monsoon season. Lyle, ever the loyal second fiddle, followed shortly after, leaving behind a stack of unpaid violation notices and a lawn chair with his name carved into it. I hear he's working at a car wash 2 towns over. Ironic symmetry, that. And Nancy? Oh, Nancy. Her house sits 2 streets over, boxed in by petunias and pride. She used to host wine tastings on Wednesdays, the kind where every bottle had a label in French and every conversation ended in a policy reminder. But the new board isn't dazzled by foreign labels or faux power. Last month, they issued her a $250 fine for unauthorized irrigation runoff, caught red-handed by one of the new HOA cameras she once claimed were too intrusive. The irony hangs thicker than desert heat. The board now? Made up of real people. Terry from Lot 8, who brings donuts to meetings. Myra from the cul-de-sac, who once organized a block party and didn't fine anyone for parking on the curb. They're not perfect, but they listen. They understand the difference between enforcement and tyranny, between policy and decency. As for me, I keep things simple. The spigot has a brass lock now, industrial grade, the kind that says, "Don't even think about it." But it's not about paranoia anymore. It's about peace, about boundaries respected, lessons learned. And whenever I hear the hiss of running water, lawn sprinklers, hoses, even a kid's water balloon fight, I smile, because for the first time in a long while, it sounds exactly like it should. It sounds like justice.